Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to 21 Acres series with Hawthorn Farm, which is all about homesteading basics and homesteading advancedness. They are such incredible educators, and we're just really excited to work with them. My name is Rianne. I work for 21 Acres as an administrative assistant. And again, I'm excited to welcome you here today, and we appreciate you joining us. So today we're gonna see, you see Alexia on camera there in the wonderful hoop house, and Daniel, who's behind the camera, and they are our homesteading educators teaching us today and throughout the last year on a variety of topics that relate to sustainable living and homesteading, from seed to harvest to cooking and fermentation and all the goodness that goes into maintaining a regenerative homestead. They're truly amazing, and we're really lucky to work with them. We are both here in Woodinville, and Daniel and Alexia have been homesteading, eating primarily from their own garden and homestead for many years. It's really, really awesome. Check out some of our previous stuff on YouTube with classes we've had in the last year. And they also have some wonderful educational programs at their farm that I encourage you to check out. And I just want to give a land acknowledgement as well to where we're situated. So 21 Acres and Hawthorn Farm are both located in Woodinville, Washington, on the ancestral lands of Indigenous nations, including the Stillaguamish tribe, the Duwamish, and Coast Salish peoples. And we acknowledge these nations as the original stewards of this land. We honor both the land itself and the Coast Salish people, past and present. We really appreciate you taking a moment to honor this land with us and learn how we're trying to steward this land for future generations. And 21 Acres, for those who may not know, is a conglomerate of a regenerative farm, a living laboratory which serves to educate our communities around climate change and how to participate in climate action by promoting and building resilient food systems that are rooted in agroecology, regenerative farming, sustainable land stewardship, and adopting sustainable living and building practices. All right, without further ado, let's go, Alexia. Thank you so much.
Right. Yes. Well, thank you, Rianne, for the introduction. It's a delight to be here today. I'll try and talk over the wind that's blowing across the farm today. And I'm honored to be speaking to you all as a piece of Hawthorn Farm. I've been eating from this land long enough that I'm mostly made out of Hawthorn Farm now, which is a really cool feeling. And I want to invite all of you into the world of gardening, or farther into the world of gardening, because it's just such a joy for me. And I am learning more all the time. So thank you for the compliments, Rianne. I don't know everything, and I will never know everything, but I've learned a few things that I hope will help you. So stay tuned. There's lots to learn. You are going to make your own discoveries. I'm based here in the Pacific Northwest, mostly trying to grow food in order for our household to eat year round. So those are my goals, and that's what informs my garden planning. So you are going to navigate your own garden planning with whatever space and goals you have. The garden is an art project, and you get to determine how it goes with all the factors that weave in, some of them in your control and some of them not. So I'm just here to help you tweak the controls that you can tweak in order to have better success. And one of those keys to gardening success for serious, practical, economical, growing awesome food is starting your own plants from seed. Some new gardeners are intimidated by this, and it can be intimidating and it can be discouraging if you go just grab a whole bunch of seed off of the picture racks at the garden center and you go pour it on your garden and hardly anything comes up, or when the cabbages do come up, they're tough as cardboard and they don't really taste that great, or there are just any number of things that can go wrong with seed depending on the supplier, along with the other factors. And a lot of gardeners get discouraged because they say, oh, it must be my gardening. Well, it might be that you're just starting with very poor seed. A lot of the stuff that's sold in the garden centers is not necessarily high quality seed. So when I'm gardening and I am putting my hard-earned time and money into the soil, I want to start with good seed. And I can either grow my own or get it from a really reputable source. So some seed I can easily grow myself, and seed saving is a whole other art. Don't feel bad if you're not ready to tackle seed saving quite yet. But I buy my seed mostly from two companies. Johnny's Selected Seeds, they're in Maine, and Territorial Seed Company in Oregon. So there are other great seed companies out there. These are just ones where they can really tell you a lot about the seed. They can give you a sense that it's really going to grow. If I plant seed from those companies and it doesn't come up, it was probably me. So that's really great to know. I buy about between $300 and $600 worth of seed a year, just to give you a sense of kind of the seed budget. And from that, we grow a significant quantity of our food. So I consider good quality seed to be an excellent value. And then what to plant those seeds in. I don't know about you, I used to have giant stacks of plastic pots lying around, and I'd stuff my potting shed full of plastic pots, and I'd start a whole bunch of little plastic pots every year, and I'd have them falling apart in the garden, and I'd have plants get root bound in them with the roots circling around and around, and it was just kind of discouraging. I don't really garden because I love to hang out with plastic. So I found, thank you to Elliot Coleman, who's been an organic gardening wizard for many years, reading one of his books, I got turned on to the soil block system, basically making mud pies that plants grow in. So this has revolutionized my garden planning for a few reasons. We're going to talk about the pros and the pitfalls of it as we go through the experiment of making some soil blocks. So this is the smallest size I have. We're going to start small and work our way up. This little cutie here has these 20 little squares in there. And I can take my exquisite mud mix here, which is about 3/4 sifted peat moss, something that's very fine and fibrous for a tiny little seed to grow in. And I take about 1/4 sifted compost, good quality compost that I make here myself. Compost making is a whole other topic, but decent garden soil, something that's gonna help the mix be something more than just peat moss. So sifted compost, 1 part to 3 parts peat moss, and a little pinch of garden lime or agricultural lime. That's basically chalk, and it helps neutralize some of the acidity from the peat moss. So now I have this nice mushy mud. I can just stand here in the sunshine and play with it all day. I take my little soil block maker, I smush it in there until all those little squares are nice and full. And I can even see a little water oozing out the top. Then, theoretically, I can get my, scrape the bottom off. I can press out 20 little brownies.
They're so cute.
Super cute.
Awesome.
So not all peat moss is the same. I have bought bales of peat moss from the same provider for several years, and some bales are just silky smooth and luscious, and some bales are full of sticks and twigs, and I've got to sit there and run the peat through a sieve, just co-opting a kitchen sieve, and then I'll just sift the peat moss through so that I can really keep the nice fine stuff for these little tiny baby brownie bites. Because I need to take my clean, dry hand and then put 1 little seed in each of those brownie bites. You're probably not going to be able to see my little tiny arugula seeds here. but I have one seed in each brownie bite, and I don't need to cover them or anything. I can just pat them in a little bit. I'm not going to fill up the full tray, but you see every seed gets one cube. And this way, I can really see who's going to germinate or not. I don't need to plant a whole bunch of seeds out in the garden and then thin them. I don't need to wipe out any perfectly good seedlings just because they happen to be close to another seedling. Now, I don't use this soil block method for every single thing I grow all the time, but it has really helped me with my garden planning because I know how many arugula seeds I have. I know how many kohlrabi seeds I have, and I can give every single seed a chance. So it helps me make good economical use of that high quality seed that I bought. Over here, you can see the tatsoi, little baby tatsoi. So that's a little brassica green that I planted a week ago. And there's some lettuces that I planted a week ago coming up, and some spinach. Even bigger seeds will work okay in these little brownie bite cubes.
This is awesome.
I make sure to label everything. So I'm just going to write arugula or arug. And then what's the date today? 4/10?
4/10, yeah.
And I just write 4/10 on the other side of the popsicle stick in good dark pencil. And I just put that right in there with those little brownie cubes. And I'll usually try to fill up a whole tray of these. You can see this is a very fancy tray I've got here. It's just an old tote lid. And I try not to plant identical looking seeds next to each other. Like if I plant broccoli and cabbage seeds right next to each other, then when they come up, or if the labels get jostled, all of a sudden I'm wondering if it's a broccoli or a cabbage. So I might plant broccoli here, plant lettuce in between, and then cabbage over here. Some way that I'm going to be able to remember what's coming up. So there, the plants start in these little tiny brownie bite cubes. Most of them do. And then once they germinate, like this cute little tatsoi here, that's been growing for a week, I don't see any roots coming out the bottom. Here's a pitfall to starting seeds in soil blocks. You've got to stay on top of when this little plant is going to need more room. A little veggie like this could double its root mass in 7 days. So if you keep putting it off and you keep putting it off, the plants just aren't going to be able to do their best for you. So stay on top of moving them, whether I'm either going to put this into a bigger block or just put this little plant right in the soil. I know that I'm getting a plant out of the seed. It's looking pretty good so far. I can go over to wherever I want that plant to grow. I make a little hole, pour a little water in, and then I just gently snuggle that plant into that nice muddy hole. Ta-da!
Woo!
The plant just didn't experience any stress. It's super tiny. You can't really see it down there, I know, but I know that that plant is getting a good start. And if I just stand back, probably in a few weeks, I'll have a wonderful tatsoi plant to harvest. And I didn't have to prepare my soil a lot. I really love not having to hoe or till my soil much at all. So when I start with these little transplant cubes, I can just scooch aside the soil, plunk that little plant in, we're good to go. I don't need to make everything all fine and soft for a little tiny seedling to come up out in the big wild world of the garden. I can have all my cute little seedlings right here close by in a nice cozy hoop house where I can fuss over them and make sure that they have enough heat, they have enough fertility, they have enough water. Soil cubes, and you'll note my fancy watering can here. Soil cubes are easy to water from below. I just pour a little water onto the tray, and that water will soak up through the cubes as long as that tray is relatively level. And these plants will stay watered through the day. When I've just planted a tray, sometimes I'll just put another plastic lid on top to keep moisture in those cubes while the little seedlings are germinating, because while they're in that super tender stage, they don't really have any roots yet. I need to make sure that the soil stays moist the whole time those seedlings are germinating. And then there's also the issue of temperature. Seeds like to germinate at different temperatures. So a lettuce seedling, a lettuce seed, might be happy to start turning into a lettuce plant when the soil is 57 degrees, let's say. Whereas a pepper seed is like 57 degrees. That is way too cold for a tropical plant. There is no way I'm even germinating until it's 75. So when I make a tray of seedlings, I want them to all be plants who can hang out in relatively the same kind of temperature. These are all my cool weather starts. And this time is a great time of year. You know, early spring, I can get cool weather starts like spinach, lettuce, chard, onions, kohlrabi, broccoli. I can get a lot of those cool weather loving plants going at this time of year. However, for our tropical heat loving friends like tomatoes and peppers, I start them in a handy little chamber like this that has a lid so that I can take all those germinating seedlings inside at night, and I can make sure that they stay a good solid 75 degrees or so. I put them on top of our dehydrator when we're dehydrating other stuff. You might also try something like an electric blanket folded up inside a cooler, and then you put the seedlings on top, you know, or in your oven with the pilot light on. Just have to think about what's going to be the safest, best smelling options for your dwelling, but some way to keep seedlings at the optimum temperature for that kind of seedling, which basically kind of divides into the cool season crops, the stuff that can grow before your last frost date, and then the tropical stuff or the frost tender stuff, tomatoes, peppers, squash, corn, a lot of what people think of as the typical summer crops. They don't want to grow unless the soil is 60 degrees and above. And for a lot of those, the warmer the better, up till about 80 degrees. So make sure your seedlings are at the right temperature. It's easy for me to start 200 tropical seedlings in their tiny little brownie bites and keep them nice and warm, and then bring them out here. I gotta get these babies out of these tiny cubes. That is where the next size comes into play. So this is my next size up of a block maker. It's a 2-inch cube. It is the most useful size. If I had to get just one, I might get this one.
If I could interrupt really quickly by sharing for folks who are watching, I want to definitely get the link to that, to find that awesome soil block creator, and I will share it with everybody in Eventbrite with a follow-up email full of resources, so you can participate in this great seed growing. And then whenever there's a good pausing time, we do have a couple questions that have come up, but you've answered one already about water.
Okay. Well, yeah, maybe let's just make these big seed blocks here, and then we'll we'll dive into some questions, because this size and the whole seed block assemblage, like all 3 mold makers, cost me about $200 from Johnny's Selected Seeds. This is a super useful one where I come over to my mix, and I'll talk about what I use in my mix here soon. And I bring this little tray of babies over where I've already made a few of these 2-inch soil cubes. Oh, these are a little crumbly. They've dried out since I made the mix this morning. Like I said, this is mud pie making. If you add a little bit of water, add a little bit of peat moss, you can kind of fine tune your mix. Now that I have these 2-inch cubes, I can do a few things. One is that I can just take one of my little 2-inch seed, my little tiny seedlings, and I can just snuggle it right in there and make sure there's good soil contact. Ta-da! All of a sudden, that little pepper plant has a great new home for all its roots. It's going to fill that space up with roots. This is still small enough for me to fuss over it, cover it up on cold nights, or even bring it into the house. I could also take one of my little tatsoi greens and stick one of those into a brownie or into one of these 2-inch cubes, you know, if I wasn't ready to plant this out in the garden. This system is a great way to make awesome use of space, because if I have plants out in my garden 2 weeks before I finish harvesting those, I can get cute little seedlings going here. Then as soon as I pull out the thing that I'm harvesting in my garden, let's say I'm taking out the last winter mustard greens, I've already got little baby lettuces, bing, ready to go in and start growing. So that really helps me keep my productive land kind of continuously growing greens without having to wait for stuff to germinate out there. I can also direct sow seeds right into these 2-inch squares. So for something like a squash seed or corn or beans, this is a much more appropriate size, obviously, than the tiny little brownie bites. So for something like this, at this time of year, I might put 2 or 3 pea seeds into each of these little cubes. Peas love growing in crowds. So these are super sugar snap peas, and I might put 3 or 4 seeds in. Since these are such big seeds, I'm going to press them down a little bit. And then as soon as those pea seeds germinate and send up their leaves and have roots coming down into the rest of the cube, I can just take this cube, plunk it in the garden where I want peas. But whew, they've gotten a nice warm start in this hoop house. It's going to help them germinate. And again, I can fuss over them here, water them, and they're going to germinate a lot better than if I just plunk them into the 50-degree soil that's outside in my garden now. I can start them in here where it's nice and warm, harden them off, you know, kind of get them used to being outside in full sunlight by taking them outside for a day or two, and then I can plant them out there. So those are a few ways to use the 2-inch soil blocks. I'll also put squash seeds in these, and just as soon as that squash, those little squash leaves grow, I'll transplant that squash out somewhere. Okay, I bring on some questions here.
Oh, this was so fantastic. I really appreciate your comprehensive explanation. And now I'm always going to think about brownie bites a little bit differently, a little more nutritiously. So one question in the chat came just in regards to the object that you're using for the seed starting trays, the tops of the lids. Mm-hmm. They asked if it's okay to use a kitchen sheet pan or if metal is not ideal due to temperature or anything.
It might just depend on the metal. I mean, here's an old plastic cafeteria tray I'm using. Mm-hmm. I have totally used metal pans as well. They tend to rust a little bit, mm-hmm. But you know, I would say maybe steering away from an aluminum pan that might just leach, you know, sometimes with the acidic soil, it'll just get more aluminum into the soil than you need. But old cookie trays are great. So yeah, whatever you've got, it will probably work. And I use all sorts of old lids and so forth.
Use something with edges so that it will hold the water.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Daniel. Definitely. That seems to be like a really just resourceful method, because of course that has the lid, you just plop it on and pour some water on, and it looked like when you were watering, it was directly almost like into the plastic rather than. Yep. Okay, great.
Yeah, so I'm just watering like into, you know, at the base of the trays. I'm not pouring water over the seeds. Also, because seedlings don't always like cold water poured on them. Again, we're trying to keep these seedlings warm to germinate. So I'll sometimes just use warm water that's been warmed by the sun to water them, you know, or if it's a time of day when I feel like I would enjoy a cold shower, then the seedlings can get a cold shower.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, so it is really about playing to their temperature, their specific needs as seeds too. And I was glad that you you showed us what was in the mix of the soil. I was wondering, I just got some organic seed starting mix. I don't remember who from. But when you're creating your soil, as you mentioned, it's going right into the soil. You already know about that in your hoop house. Like, you know what the plants are needing to thrive best there. And I was just wondering if I guess, if gardeners should be more proactive in understanding the soil of their beds that the seeds will go and grow into, and if that might have any effect on what seed mix they should use, or is it generally quite the same for all starting seeds?
That's definitely one of those it depends and
Yeah.
play around kind of questions. But it does bring me to the basic mix that I have here, which is 1/3 peat moss, about 1/3 of my own homemade compost from the goat pen, like fertilizer grade compost aged about 2 years, and then about 1/3 standard garden soil, just sifted soil from my own garden. I want the seeds to just get used to the soil I'm going to plant them in. Like, I believe in giving them what they need, but in not growing weak plants.
Yes, that is so important.
Yeah, so I just go ahead and use my standard garden soil, sifted so it doesn't have big rocks in it. But I want these seedlings to start coping with all the different bacteria and fungi that are living on this farm from day one. So that's what I use. And then I also throw in some sand, or you could also use perlite, which is like a puffed up volcanic sand. It's like puffed rice, but with rocks. So that mix, this is what I use. Every time is a little different. So if your soil is more clayey, you might add a little more sand. Or if your soil is sandier, then maybe you don't have to add sand. So mess around with what slides out of your block maker easily. And that's going to be kind of your basic template mix. For me, the peat moss has been super helpful. I think I would rather use peat moss than coconut coir, just because the peat moss is nearby and I use a fairly small amount. You can also develop your own compost mixes or, your own special compost piles for this. But if you're just getting started, you can just buy some peat moss. You could probably sift more of your garden soil to do that. A lot of the compost that's sold in bags isn't necessarily, it might be great for landscaping, but it's not like plant growing compost. We're lucky to have a local company called Kiss Organics
I love that.
Produce like actual veggie growing soil, and it's worth it. I'll garden on tote lids and with like random other equipment, but the good seeds and good soil are where to focus your money for sure. And to this mix, there are a couple of other additions I wanted to mention. One is, like I mentioned with the tiny soil blocks, the ag lime. A bag of this is super cheap and it will last years. I just add in a little sprinkle. It's like kind of the powdered sugar on the chocolate cake. Doesn't have to be a whole bunch. This is kelp meal. It's ground up kelp. It's about $100 these days for a 50-pound bag. But again, a bag's going to last for years. We feed it to our animals too. I can add some of that in. If I'm using the soil mix for brand new seedlings, I won't add fertilizer. But if I'm using this soil mix to up pot little plants that have already grown, they're like hungry teenagers. So I might throw in some kind of fertilizer. People use blood meal or feather meal. Not too much of it. I'm using cocoa powder. It's a seed meal. Someone gave us a bag of it that tastes terrible. So it goes into the seedling mix.
That's awesome.
Resourceful. If you have a bag of old flour, just throw in a little handful. You don't want to like make it into dough, but just enough to kind of feed the soil life. And then when you mix all this up and you add enough water for it to slide out of your block maker, you're good. Do a little test sample, put a few, mustard green seeds in some initial trial blocks and see what happens. The plants will tell you how they like it. And you don't even have to go out and get a whole soil block system right away. Something like this, a little cheap flexible plastic cup that came in a box of something else. I can just make a mud pie and I can just squish it out and I can plant a little seed right in the top of it. And then, I might just try 5 of these and plant my little squash right in there and see how they like it. So I just saved myself $200 by trying this, to just test out the concept. So I want to give you the basic concept of growing seeds in blocks of soil, and then you can experiment with it. I mean, this is a technique that's been used in lots of places for lots of centuries. So you can give it a try with what you have at hand. And if a block doesn't work, or if it crumbles, or if the seeds don't come up, they just go back into the great universal consciousness of the, mud pit.
Yes, it's returning back to the earth and just with a little bit more little seed of nutrition. Well,
You
that's
just
like,
mush it up. Yeah.
that is just so perfect. I just got inspired to maybe try with like a flexible ice cube tray, because my ice cube tray is rigid, but I was like, oh my gosh, that could be perfect. I'm gonna go through Goodwill. We love upcycling, and I love seeing all of the ways you're creatively using so many plastics and diverting them from the waste stream.
Totally. Yeah, you can definitely make do with a lot. I'm always asking myself in my gardening, do I actually have to do that? Or can I not do that and still get great results? And I'm putting my energy into these seedlings started because that's where I enjoy putting my energy as a gardener. Like, this is my natural habitat in here. Super fun. So this is what I enjoy doing. And I want to show you. Actually, are there any other questions before we?
Yes, thank you so much for pausing for them. There's one thing that came up just again about core, rather using is that coconut core rather than okay, so people were wondering how come you prefer peat over core. Again, just one more time.
Oh, sure. I live on the same continent as peat moss. So for me, peat moss feels like a more renewable resource than bringing so much core from far away. And I just haven't liked how it performs in the blocks either. So, your mileage may vary. Like I said, I get a lot of variability in the peat moss I buy too. So I just like it. I would also like to switch into composted horse manure, since I have access to an abundance of that, as kind of a fibrous addition to the mix to help it hold together. And that's even more local than your peat moss.
I thought it had to do with the locality. Yeah. And I know there's just so many things we keep discovering about, like, oh, maybe this gardening practice isn't as great as we realized. And I know one of my favorite gardeners named Monty Don, who's in Britain, he's made some comments about peat moss too, and I'm just like, I just want to find something that's sustainable, that works, and is able to be replenished. And I know, like peat moss is. And one more quick thing about soil for viewers who are watching later. I wanted to share that in Washington State, King Conservation District has an amazing free soil testing program. So you can learn about where, what your garden bed's going to do and how the physical, chemical, and biological processes of your specific garden soil are going to work for your plants, and you can find out what amendments you'd like to make. And it kind of goes along with not creating weak plants that will go into the ground. Like, they need to be exposed to the soil you have. Maybe the soil you have isn't very hot, so definitely test your soil, get used to it, but also do trust the plant to grow, because as Alexia said, good seeds, good soil, you should be good.
Mm-hmm.
And also, Rian, just to add, this is Daniel from behind the camera. Last month's, or maybe it was the month before, class on that Alexia gave on soil building and soil care is a great resource for care of soil, and that's on the 21 Acres website.
It is. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Okay. Well, I've got some plants here who are part of a science experiment. So I want to mention again that pitfall of really needing to keep the plants moving from a small container to a large one so that the roots don't bump into the edges of anything and get stuck. When there is smooth ability to keep those roots growing, your plants are going to do quite well for you. This tray of tomato plants looks a little different than this tray of tomato plants, right?
Mm-hmm.
So guess what? They are from the exact same seed packet, planted the exact same day. These are the ones that I was timely about moving into the bigger cubes. These are the ones I was not. So I planted all of these in February, probably somewhere in the beginning of or mid-February. These are doing pretty well. Like, these are some sturdy tomato plants. Are already coming up with little flower buds. These, not so much. They are the exact same genetics. These are all sun gold cherry tomatoes, but these did not get moved into the bigger cube in a timely way. So let me show you the bigger cube, because you're going to want to know about that. If you're growing things like tomatoes where you really are keeping them in a hoop house or undercover for a long period of time, you just have to give them the space they need. Although plants who grow big in a soil block, they do better, I think, than plants growing in a pot. In a pot, the roots will start circling around and around. In a soil block, they just kind of get to the edge. You'll probably also want to keep your soil block plants close together. The ones at the edge tend to dry out. Sometimes I'll make empty cubes all around the edge of a tray so that the ones in the middle that I have planted will actually work better. So this big soil blocker makes a 4-inch cube. Too wet now. This is so fun. This is such a fun project to get kids working on.
Yeah.
Everything's math of, what your seed germination rate is to just messing around in the mud. So there we go. There's my 4-inch cube. I can go get one of the tomato seedlings I've got in a 2-inch cube, where the little tiny roots, you're not going to be able to see them, but I have little tiny roots just beginning to come out. Perfect. This little teenage plant is ready for the next stage. So I just put it into that soil block and I smoosh it right in. How do I move a soil block around? Mud pie time. You can just co-opt some kitchen implements. And there we go. There's my nice tomato seedling ready to go. So that is the scoop on soil blocks. And I'll, just reiterate that they need to, a lot of these seeds need to be quite warm to germinate. The hoop house we're in right now is actually heated by compost. So this whole bench in here is filled with fresh horse manure, a resource which is in abundance in this area, although you could use other things. And in February, when we had a great big work party, everybody's moving manure in here. We wove a willow fence to hold that manure pile there. We have straw bales along the north edge to help insulate it. And this was steaming. My compost thermometer over here was reading 180 degrees, which is hotter than I usually like to make compost. But let me tell you, the cucumbers and tomatoes on top were loving it. It was like a little piece of Florida. The compost pile has cooled down quite a bit. It's only 80 degrees in there now, but that's still enough to help warm the plants that are on top, especially on a cold night. Right now it's warm in here because of the sun, but we're still getting frosty nights. And I can run out here and I can put little plastic totes or covers or, you know, drape a little sheet over my tomato plants, and they're going to get that warmth from below and have quite a bit of frost protection. I regularly have frost on the inside of this hoop house, but the tomatoes have been doing just fine. I was even able to start cucumbers in this hoop house. Right now it's the beginning of April. It's way too early to plant cucumbers outside, but a lot of these cucumbers, which I typically cover at night, are doing fine, and their roots are probably 18 inches throughout that bed of compost. So these are ready to take off and get going as soon as the weather is warm. A lot of times people don't plant cucumbers out until May, you know, well after the last frost when the soil is quite warm. Last year in this hoop house, we were eating cucumbers in May. So the hotbed is just another way for us to get a jump on the season. Not that everybody has as much horse manure or space to do that, but I just want to say that there are really cool techniques for you to figure out how to get your seedlings the warmth they need when they need it. And I started these guys in little soil cubes, and then I knew who was going to germinate, and I could just plunk them in to the nice, steamy, warm soil there. Another thing that I do, I mean, again, reusing stuff, just an old vinegar jug with the bottom cut out. I'll come and I'll put that over a seedling at night. And I like a hot water bottle on a chilly spring night, just filling up a jug with water, letting it heat up during the day, and then at night I'll put that jug right next to my tomatoes, cover the whole thing. They get a little hot water bottle for the night. Sometimes I even read them a bedtime story. Any questions from that next wave of information?
I'm just so impressed and like very grateful to learn the story of the horse manure turning into this just fabulous, perfect seed starting extravaganza. And it really inspires me to like think about other ways I can heat my plants and extend the growing season at home. And I know in like industrial settings, it's a little warmer, just barely, but a little warmer. So it could even extend your growing season if you're in a city and you're watching us here. Okay, there is a question from the chat, wondering if there are any other seeds that prefer a crowded seeding like the peas do.
Oh, right. Gosh. Some of it is it depends. Like if you're trying to grow plants, something like baby lettuces, and you're trying to grow them close together so you just come along and snip them. Peas are the ones I use the most. I would refer you to Steve Solomon's, what's it called? Growing Vegetables West of the Cascades. The 6th edition, usually kind of the most recent editions are going to be the best. Growing Vegetables West of the Cascades. He has a whole chapter in here, and I'm not going to try to find it right now, but a chart of which are the plants that do well growing close together, the plants that could kind of go either way, and then the plants that really need a lot of space. That's a whole garden conundrum in and of itself of how to space your plants. Here's a little spoiler alert. I am a fan of very wide plant spacing, like giving each plant a lot of space. Once I put it out in the garden, means that the plant can do most of the work of finding water and food, and then I have to do less. But again, I'm dealing with, you know, nearly an acre of garden, whereas if you have a small raised bed or a garden plot, you want to be growing plants close in there together. There's another thing about relative value of plants. I mentioned herbs. Growing fresh herbs are where you get the most bang for your buck in terms of nutrition and how much they cost at the store. So if folks have limited space, I say grow some herbs in a pot. Like that's a great way to really add that beautiful flavor and nutrition to your meals without needing a giant garden. And then greens are a close second. Being able to have a fresh salad that you harvest yourself is just amazing.
Yeah, and of course, growing herbs from seed is this also just really rewarding experience of seeing them just start to take off, and they too require, guess it's specific to which seed, but they all the seeds like warmness, just a little bit of
Yeah.
warmth. Or
a little bit of warmth. I want to give them just enough warmth without making them too tender. Because if I'm growing a plant in a warm environment and then I put it out into a cold garden, whoa, it just shocks them. Another thing to do in a small space, I'm growing pea shoots here. And I just have a bunch of soaked pea seeds of a special variety. I buy a big bag of them from Johnny's Seed Company.
oh, we
Sprinkle seeds on the ground, cover them up. Probably in 2 weeks, there's going to be a whole forest of pea shoots here. I'll take off this paper as soon as they really have their roots into the soil. And again, the warmth is helping these pea shoots grow. I have replicated this just growing pea shoots in some soil inside in the windowsill all winter long. I can just put some decent garden soil in here, add a little sprinkle of kelp for the extra nutrition in the greens, sprinkle my moistened pea seeds on top, put a piece of newspaper on it. Next thing I know, we're coming along and snipping off a beautiful harvest of pea shoots. So that's a great windowsill gardening tip that works well to keep us in greens all winter long as well. And I'm just doing a spring batch out here. I just wanted to show you that basic technique too.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm so excited for the peas. I feel like they're the indicator, like you made it, you can grow, you've been growing, keep on eating. So you said there was a little bit of wind there that it kind of covered your voice for a moment. Did you say you were covering them, soaking them, or you soaked them in water?
I soaked them in water for a few hours.
Okay.
Enough for the seeds to really plump up with water. And then I just came out here and I really just sprinkled the pea seeds on an area, and then I just covered them with some paper. And the paper is to just keep the moisture in, because I didn't bury the seeds at all. I just sprinkled them right on top of the soil, and then I just put the paper on top. And after a few days, once the peas have their roots down into the soil, I will, take off the paper, let the pea shoots grow up a little more, and then just eat the heck out of them. They are a delicious salad green, especially when the other stuff we've got growing right now is like really spicy mustards. The pea shoots are perfect.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yep, that's the only thing I have growing is something very spicy left over from last year, my arugula spice. We had another question about the plant blocks, the soil blocks. Laura asks, can you think of any varieties of vegetables that you would not put in a plant block? And also, have you tried using these blocks for growing woody plants?
Great question. So you can start pretty much everything this way. There are some things for which it's not worthwhile. I still do a fair amount of direct seeding because there are advantages to that too. Like I can direct seed arugula or things, that do grow just fine. I can kind of do a lot of these things either way. I direct sow corn, for instance, when the soil is warm. So it really depends on if I'm trying to get a jump on the season, like if I'm trying to start beans a week before my last frost date, or if I'm just going to go ahead, wait till after my last frost date and put the beans out in the garden, just direct sow the beans right out there in the garden. There are other ways with your handy dandy clear plastic milk jugs or what have you to go out to your garden, plant the seed, and then give it a little greenhouse right there in place until that seed comes up. That's a way to just right there in place give your seedlings a little boost of warmth. I've got like a bunch of old clear plastic refrigerator trays and stuff around the garden now, and that's really to give those plants a little extra boost of warmth. And you can start woody cuttings this way. The little dowels that I have in the little spacers inside the middle here, you can actually get one or make one that's just a long hole so that you can take your soil block and just put a woody cutting in it, depending on what kind of plants you're starting. I do most of my woody plant starting either by root propagation or by cutting sideways, or just sticking a whole bunch of them in a bucket of loose soil. But you can absolutely use these for propagating other plants too. Like, instead of putting in a baby tomato, I could have just put in a piece of a root of something I was trying to do a root propagation with. Yeah.
Thank you.
Another few plants that we direct sow are carrots, beets, turnips, lots of root veg, potatoes, and anything that we're going to do a lot of row feed of, like corn.
Yeah.
You guys are psychic with the chat sometimes. It's really cool. We did have a question just clarifying if root vegetables would be worthwhile to direct sow. And I personally, I think yes, but also would they be okay to do in the soil blocks?
So and I have done it in soil blocks, just basically to get the seed to germinate.
Yeah, that's my
I just have a tough time getting carrot seed to germinate out in the garden because it needs just such the right amount of moisture. So if I just get the seeds to barely germinate in here where I can fuss over them, and I'm kind of just naturally in here working and watering every day, then as soon as they've germinated, I can whisk them out to the garden, and I just hope that they don't even know the difference. Like, they just didn't even notice. But yeah, the root veggies, you really need to either direct sow them or get them out into the garden before they would notice, like before their little root has penetrated down. Squash, similar thing. Squash tend to send out a great big fragile taproot, like before they have any sort of abundance of leaves. So it can make a lot of sense to direct sow your squash, unless you're hovering over the babies in your soil cubes and you're like ready to whisk them out as soon as it looks like that their roots are getting to the bottom of their soil cube. So again, yeah, squash are a great one to plant and then put a little cover over, a little cloche over when you're trying to germinate that seed in the garden. I do that in order to get an early jump on things like zucchini and summer squash.
Thank you so much, especially for the clarification, but the confidence boost with carrots and all the problems I have. I have never been able to grow carrots in my entire life, and I've tried for so many years, and I've only direct sowed. This is the year that I've tried to take the germination into my own hands, and this valuable course is really reinforcing, why that's important, but also how much easier it is and resourceful it is to start a garden this way.
It's nice. I really enjoy it, and it saves me a lot of seed money. Like, I'm not planting extra seed out in the garden, and it also saves me probably about 70 hours a year of soil prep out in the garden, because I don't need to get the soil out there so fine. I don't need to do the tillage. I'm moving away more and more from deeply tilling any of my gardens. So I can just make a hole in my awesome garden soil, plunk in my little seed cube, and I can just enjoy the harvest. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, it looks like we only have 5 minutes remaining. I know. Is there any other topics you wanted to cover? Should I do a good last call for some questions?
Oh gosh, let me check my notes.
I would say, well, during the pause, just be aware of the difference between hardware store and garden center seed packets and starts versus ordering seeds from seed companies. We've had quite a variety of difference in quality. So those starts at the garden center are made to look good at the garden center, but maybe not produce the best vegetables. Maybe not.
Right. So you can take it into your own hands and be part of the grand alliance, as Carol Deppy says, between plants and people. We have a lot of generations of people to thank for bringing us things like a cucumber or a tomato. Like, this is incredible that we have these plants willing to work with us and feed us. So being part of that grand alliance by tending your garden and being involved with the magic of the seeds is an awesome way to go. And you're going to have failures, you're going to have successes. Like, this is just so much fun. And I definitely want to hear how things go for you all out there with your gardens.
Yes, I know. I'm so excited for everyone to grow and become more part of the food system that we are always participating in regardless. And I just wanted to share, there are two questions, but before
Great.
that, I wanted to say thank you, Daniel, for that wonderful just kind of synthesis on why it's so important to make sure you're sourcing quality foods from or seeds from great companies who are promoting, you know, sustainability in a way, and giving the good seeds to people to really, you know, take their projects on. We did have a question about how Home Depot is for quality of seeds or starts, and just wondering if you might be able to speak to that, and then one more question at the end.
Okay, I've never bought seeds or seedlings from Home Depot or most any other sort of big box store. When you're there, you can discreetly take a look inside those pots and see if the roots have started circling around. If you don't see the roots circling around, it might be worth a try to bring those seedlings home if you feel inspired. Just know that they've probably been in a warm greenhouse, because when the grower cranks up the heat, those plants are ready a week sooner. So that squash seedling you buy might have just been lounging in the tropics, and then all of a sudden you're asking it to cope with 55-degree Washington nights, and it's like, I'm gonna stop growing.
Fertilizer too.
Yeah, you kind of need to give some fertilizer and help those plants adjust to the climate in your garden when they've probably been coming from a commercial greenhouse. Not to say you shouldn't use them, just know that they might need a little extra TLC, and that's why I find it easier to just start mine. You can give things a try. Sometimes people will sell like cabbages or broccoli that are already flowering. I've seen lots of stuff like that for sale, and that's just not going to give you a good harvest to get plants that are already past the stage of development where you want to eat them. So caveat emptor, let the buyer beware.
Yeah.
One more question?
One more question. We have a question about experience with seedlings that have stopped growing recently. Are there any ideas on where one of our participants may have gone wrong with having their seeds just stopped growing?
There are several things that could be happening. I'll give experience based on my region. One is if there are any little critters in the soil. Around here, they're called symphylans, who love to eat root hairs, especially of things like spinach and strawberries and cauliflower. That's why I have a hard time growing those crops here in some of my garden spaces. So sometimes it's some critter under the soil. Cold soil will sometimes decrease, or if that plant has used up all the nutrients it can find in its root zone, especially during the spring cold weather, there's often a lack of nitrogen, because nitrogen gets into the soil through biological activity, and biological activity happens when the soil is warm. So you can try to boost your plant with a little extra nitrogen, whether it's the seed meal, a little blood meal, something like that. The cheap free one I just have to mention is urine. You know, a little diluted dose of that to see if your plant greens up, depending on what kind of plant it is. Well, then that was your issue. So a good fertilizer boost can help the plant get out of that phase it's in.
Thank you so much. And I'm so grateful for your holistic overview and why, you know, keeping our resources at like a high point of can I use this again? Do I need to make this extra space by weeding too much, or, you know, whatever, like just making sure that the systems that are in place are reciprocal, and like we can be much more resourceful than we've been, especially in American culture. It's very overwhelmingly wasteful. So you were just so refreshing to learn from, and both of you, just all the agroecological experience you have is really great in decolonizing our systems. And is that a bunny ear? So
that's a bunny ear.
is a perfect segue. Next.
the other side of the garden, which is the rabbits. So we
Yes.
talked about homestead rabbit keeping. So yeah.
Next month, definitely please join us for their class in homesteading with rabbits. It is so fundamental, very cute, but also respects the holistic process of the amazing ecological benefits that rabbits give to the environment. And I'm just super excited to work with you again next month. And I'm sad we ran out of time, but
There's so much more. For those of you, I'll try and stay tuned with the comments on the YouTube video and be able to try to answer questions or fill in all those things. Where it's like, oh, I wish I had said that. So yeah, looking forward to that.
Thank you so much too for everyone. Please definitely check out our YouTube channel. We've got past episodes, especially the soil health one with Alexia, building soil health. And there is one question, a burning question in the chat.
Okay.
You had a really great jar of seeds and I cut you off. What is that big jar you are holding?
So these are my saved seeds of bush dry beans. This is just one of those. It's like, wow, it's a no-brainer to save seeds. I have so many amazing seeds that I have started saving. And the dry beans are, of course, a really easy one. Arugula is a really easy one. So this says eat or plant. So part of the homestead resilience. These are all plantable seeds, or we can make chili out of them. So I've saved a lot of bean seed, and these are the ones that are like, well, we could eat them or plant them. And I look forward to planting them again, and the cycle will begin anew.
So beautiful. That's a perfect way to end and just inspire us to get out there, start that cycle for ourselves, be resilient, eat well. Well, again, everyone, thank you so much for joining, and we look forward to hanging out with you next month. Happy growing, everybody.
Yeah, the garter snake says bye.
There's a garter snake. Oh, hi.
They love the hoop house.
That is so awesome, Daniel. Thank you for showing. Okay, everybody, thank you again for joining us. Happy April. We'll see you next month.
All right, bye.
Take care.